Well, welcome everybody. My name's Peter McLean and I'm the CEO at Bicycle New South Wales. I wanted to start off with an acknowledgement of country and an acknowledgement to all the different countries which people join us from right across the amazing state of New South Wales, regional and metropolitan areas. Myself, I come from some intersectional tribal lands at the which include the areas of Tharawal, Darug, and Gadigal country. Start that one again. Sorry, not Gadigal. I was in Gadigal earlier today, and now I'm in Gundagra, Tharawal, and Darug country. Or partly part of the Eora Nation, which many of us also come from. Uh, I'd also like to equally welcome everyone for joining us at tonight's webinar. It's going to be a really, really interesting subject, focusing on from car crash to comeback. Bicycle rider rehabilitation secrets revealed. So really, really interesting topic. Obviously, bicycle riding is certainly a reasonably safe and very enjoyable sport and recreational activity. And we do our utmost to ensure that the bicycle user groups and members are well educated and across really great safety protocols to ensure that we're always riding and being safe when we're on our bicycles. But of course, there does come the possibility, of course, of some crashes happening, and we want to try and talk about these. So we're educating and raising awareness. And we've got two amazing speakers today, Leigh Davidson and Tim Keeley, who I'll introduce a little bit more in just a moment's time. The outline of the webinar, though, it is a Q&A session, so there's a three-speaker panel, and there'll be some questions towards the end. I'm hoping that we'll have the time to answer lots of them. How we do that is we can either put our hand up and I can go around and find people, or in your more option at the bottom of your screen, if you click on more, there's a chat option there as well, which you can pop in and I'll ask the question on your behalf. But I'll touch on that a bit later on as well in the webinar. Everyone has already been automatically muted, so if you could just keep yourself on mute, just in case there's some unplanned background noise coming in, that would be fantastic as well. Now, though, it's my absolute pleasure and an honour to introduce our two amazing guest speakers, Leigh Davidson and Tim Keeley. So Leigh Davidson is the Principal Solicitor of Advantage Legal, who are the exclusive legal compensation partners of Bicycle New South Wales. Leigh is an accredited specialist in personal injury law and has considerable experience in New South Wales personal injury compensation claims. Leigh is an expert in bicycle injury compensation, particularly through New South Wales CTP scheme and New South Wales workers' compensation schemes. And it's been fantastic that Bicycle New South Wales have partnered with Advantage Legal due to their dedication to helping the cycling community. Not just from a rehabilitation perspective, but from a legal perspective, of course, as well. So thank you for joining us, Leigh. Did you have a disclaimer to also highlight?
Oh, thank you very much, Peter. It's good to be here. I just obviously tonight's an information session, so as best I can, I'm happy to answer questions. But once we start delving down the world of legal advice, if people are asking questions, there may be if it's too sort of personal or something like that, I'm happy to take it offline. So I have to sort of restrict my answers today, just a general information. But overall, you'll get some really informative stuff, I hope.
Fantastic. Thanks, Leigh. And Tim, Tim Keeley is the principal physiotherapist at Physio Fitness, a physiotherapy and sports injury clinic in Sydney. His team specialises in rehabilitation of injuries and surgery for the fitness enthusiast, endurance athlete, and sports persons, enabling them to be as successful at their recovery and return to exercise as soon as possible. Tim has been in private practice for over 25 years and completed over 20,000, that's a huge number of treatments during his time. He is a rehabilitation expert and also does a lot of speaking in health professions and health courses, as well as a presenter. A keen cyclist himself, which is always fantastic to see. Tim competes in various Australian triathlons and also the 70.3 Ironman courses each year as well. So a very big thank you and welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you. Well, I'll get straight into the questions then now. And the first question to both of you, Leigh first. If you've been injured on your bicycle following a car crash, what do you need to do to obtain treatment through the New South Wales Compensation Scheme?
So if we're assuming that there's no hospital involved, you jump straight into going to your GP to get what's called a certificate of capacity. You'll attach that to an application for personal injury benefits, which is essentially the claim form that the C2P insurer will require you to complete. And it's really important that that doctor that you go to see, or your family doctor, or whoever it is that's signing off on it for you, really itemizes every single injury so that the insurance company is aware what they are approving treatment for. So that document's really quite important. Now, along with that, your GP should be giving you the referrals that you require for treatment, and really linking in the referral why it's related, why the treatment you require is related to the accident. So again, the insurance company needs to understand why you're seeking this treatment. So if you're asking for treatment and it's not clear why it's related to the motor vehicle accident, well, it won't be approved. So getting your doctor to make sure that they're giving clear and concise explanation as to why that information is required is quite important. You would then send that claim form and the certificate of capacity to the C2P insurer for the driver at fault, so the vehicle that hit you, essentially. Now, it is a no-fault scheme, so irrespective of whether we're talking about C2P, sorry, irrespective of whether you were at fault for the accident or not, if it is involving a motor vehicle, you can claim even if you are not at fault. But you will find a lot of the time, at least in our experience, is that there is some element of the vehicle being at fault involved with the cycling accident. So but even for those, if you were to be entirely at fault, you can still claim against the driver. So you can get wage loss and treatment and things along those lines. So then the insurance company will accept the claim, and they'll provide you with a claim number. So then that claim number is provided to all of your treatment providers, and they can request treatment direct, or you can request treatment from the insurer, and the insurer's then got 10 days to actually respond and to approve that treatment. So that 10-day timeline is something that's actually written in the guidelines. And so they're entitled to fully utilize that and investigate whether that treatment is reasonable and necessary in that time. That's pretty much it as a starting point.
Thanks, Leigh. That's great. And from a rehab perspective and physio perspective, Tim?
Yeah, from a physio side of things, so once that insurer has approved the initial course of treatment, the patient will have, like with us, initial consultation with the physiotherapist, and we'll do a full assessment that's going to be undertaken, including like a plan for recovery. And the physio will always complete allied health treatment request form, which is then outlines the proposed treatment plan. It'll give a functional capacity and then sort of give you all the client health outcomes and goals. We then, as physios, treat in accordance with that plan. So it's very important that on the forms, everything's filled in correctly with the proper justification of why the treatment is needed. Ensure us that they won't improve it.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Tim. We might just have to try and get you to speak a little bit more into your audio. It seems a little bit low there. On to the next question, though. Will a bicycle rider be out of pocket for their ambulance and treatment expenses following a car accident, Leigh?
So, provided you lodge a CTP claim, the answer is no, as long as it's all related to the actual accident that you've had. The insurance company have an arrangement. Well, so the CTP scheme has an arrangement with hospitals that the initial emergency cover is covered under the CTP scheme, and it all sort of happens between the back end of the insurer. Then anything once you're sort of out of hospital, all of your post-admission discharge, all that kind of thing, that all happens, then the insurance company will then be charged directly with that claim number that I mentioned previously. However, it is always very important that you're getting pre-approval for anything after that initial emergency treatment, because the insurance company does retain the right to say that's not reasonable and necessary and we're not going to pay for it. So if you do go and get the treatment, that's fine, but you run the risk of it. You might be out of pocket in that circumstance.
Yeah, so on our side of things, we'll charge in accordance with the rates approved by workers' compensation or CTP. So there's no gap payment for our service provided. The insurer authorised the treatment. So yeah, when they come to physio, they're not going to be paying up front or be out of pocket as well.
Okay, excellent, fantastic. So bicycle riders often have quite complex injuries after an accident. Do the lawyers and treatment providers work together, Leigh?
Look, in my experience, not all law firms want to work with rehabilitation providers. Sometimes it depends on the circumstances, to be honest. I mean, we do at Advantage Legal. We take a very proactive approach to rehabilitation. Sometimes what typically happens is that an insurance company will appoint a rehabilitation provider, and people can be a little bit nervous about the fact that the insurer has appointed the provider. And if they've got a lawyer that doesn't know that particular provider, well, then there can be a perception of bias. Now, it is a perception. Most of the time, that's not the case, but you can't change an injured person's perception of something. So if the insurer company has appointed a provider, well, then, and they're perceived as being biased or representing the insurance company, the problem is that you're not going to get the best health outcome from the injured person, because they're always going to be second guessing what they're saying. So in some points, it actually makes sense to change the rehabilitation provider so that the injured person's actually got somebody that they've appointed that they trust. So it might be speaking to their GP, might be somebody that's known in the industry. It really doesn't matter, but it's having that level of trust from the injured person's point of view. So I mean, when we speak with rehabilitation providers, we want to make sure that the primary thing for us is that I don't mind whether an insurance company or whether it's a client that's got the rehab provider. The key thing for me is actually understanding that communication is not only with the insurer, it's with us too, so that we know what's going on in real time. So quite often, there's a lot of paperwork that gets filled in with rehabilitation providers, and at the end of the day, mistakes get made, errors happen, and it's all innocent. But if we're involved, we can prevent disputes occurring, in a year's time by going, hey, you've missed this out of your report. Could you please include this next time? And we CC the insurer in so that they know what's going on, and effectively it just prevents disputes. It also helps us understand how our client's going with rehabilitation, rather than getting it secondhand from them. We're getting the rehabilitation provider's notes. Now, the insurance company is required to give us that information, but we might not necessarily get it until weeks or months, or sometimes even years after the event. And by that time, disputes have been created, there's documentation, and it's nothing, there's no malice in it, but it's just that's the information that has been fed down the line. And because we didn't get access to it in real time, we didn't have the opportunity to fix it. So there's some really, really good things with having that. Then working with treatment providers per se, this is why we like working with people like Tim, is because you get those open, that open communication with them about what's going on and how the rehabilitation is actually going. So it wouldn't be uncommon for Tim to turn around to me and say, oh, look, this person's actually nearing their thing. We're going to, our treatment's almost done. We're going to be recommending that they're going across to an exercise physiologist or something along those lines, the next step. So, it's always good to have that, because then we can talk to our client about it. Hey, you're going to need to find an exercise physio to actually help you out. This is going to be the next steps, so start talking to your GP about who you're going to go and see. So like it really improves the relationship with the client. It means that we've got a good relationship with the insurer because, like we take a bit of the burden off them so that they're not having to go backwards and forwards with asking thousands of questions all the time. So, it really does help improve the overall running of the claim just by having that genuine communication. And so our experience is a really positive one with having open communication along these lines. So, yeah, look, it's something that we certainly love doing.
Excellent. Thanks, Leigh. And Tim?
Well, from a physio point of view, like we work with all kinds of specialists, doctors, treatment providers, insurers, but our role is rehabilitation of the client first and foremost. So our treatments and recovery planning is based all around the best outcomes for the client, which determines the correct frequency of appointments, as well as the amount of how much manual therapy you're going to get versus, say, exercise rehab you're going to get. And over the course of the rehabilitation plan, how it should be done. But when injuries get severe and a lawyer needs to be engaged to assist from, say, the legal side of things of the rehabilitation, we found it's very important that you choose the lawyer carefully, because not all law firms are the same. And that's why we like working with Advantage Legal and Leigh, because they provide a much more like personal service and hands-on approach. Like I can ring Leigh up anytime and just ask him advice and give him, advice straight away on a certain claim. They're always going to be sort of there for you, and that's quite important for physiotherapists to have that on hand, because otherwise the process takes so long if there's not good enough communication between the physio and the legal department, and that may mean that things get delayed or treatment plans get delayed or there's problems down the track. So it's very important that the physio gets the correct legal advice and education every step of the process to assist the client and the physio. So yeah, very important.
Some really important points there. Thanks, Leigh and Tim. More specifically, though, something we probably don't really like to talk about, but it is very, very important to know. What kinds of injuries do bicycle riders commonly sustain following a car accident?
So, in our practice, like generally, with cyclists, we see a whole lot of different injuries, and many can come simply from cycling. So cyclists can get just injuries from riding their bike, hamstring strains and knee pain. But when we see injuries from crashes, they usually involve things like shoulder dislocations and like tendon tears, where they actually fall on their shoulder and tear a tendon in their shoulder. But one of the most common is collarbone fractures. I've got one coming in next week who's had a collarbone fracture off his bike and then surgery as a result. But we also get elbow fractures, like landing on their elbow on the concrete. And then we get leg fractures. They're not as common, but of course there's always head and neck injuries that can go either separately or go with it. So when they have the crash, they might fracture their elbow or their collarbone, but also get a head injury. So when some cases are severe, which require immediate surgery and then post-operative rehabilitation, we see that. Some have complex injuries where there's multiple areas. Some have even had pelvic fractures and ligament tears. So they might, as part of the claim, there might be 2 or even 3 areas on that claim. They might have the pelvic fracture, which they've had an operation for. They might have a head injury, and they might also have rolled their ankle. So they might have an ankle sprain as well. And so there's multiple areas that need to be rehabilitated in those regards. And then there's also ones where people have had, maybe they've been knocked off their bike in a car crash, or they've had a collision with a car crash. And there's also collisions with pelotons. So I've had people who are in a cycling club who have then, one person's gone down on the front and they've all gone down with it, which is like a car crash. And that again could cause severe injuries as well. And a lot of them can cause, you know, significant long-term damage and a really lengthy recovery. So super important that they have insurance for that sort of thing.
And Leigh?
Look, from our circumstance, we probably tend to see the more severe kind of ones because that's what prompts people to really need a lawyer to get involved. You know, we see the circumstances where people have been completely knocked out. You know, they've got a traumatic brain injury or they've lost consciousness. We certainly see a lot of spinal injuries and degloving where they've, you know, like unfortunately, cyclists tend not to wear the same gear that, say, a motorcyclist wears when they're on a motorbike, so they're not as protected. So you do get, you know, if it's a high speed cycling accident, you get degloving injuries. So look, broken bones are very common. It can be spinal, it can be what have it could be any hips. And then look, recently I've had a couple of people where they've actually hit a car straight on, and because they were gripping the handles so hard, they've broken both hands as they've hit the car. So you know, like, it's very hard to do your work when you haven't got when both hands are strapped up. So it really depends on the nature of the circumstances of the accident. But yeah, look, we tend to see the more severe ones. I think you know, nobody's coming to see us for you know, the sort of more grazes and things like that, the sort of pulled muscles kind of stuff.
Not sure I should have asked that question, but it's a very important one, and it's important that we do focus on these more serious incidences, as rare as they can sometimes be. But in terms of looking at that from a practical sort of scenario point of view, talk us through a typical bicycle crash and the rehabilitation process attached to that. Let's assume that someone has a broken leg and works in an office, Leigh.
So look, typically a cyclist, due to at least from what we see, they typically end up getting an ambulance to the hospital. Sometimes surgery is needed. That's typically done immediately if it's emergency surgery. That they'll do radiological scans, you know, before all of that's done. Sometimes after it's done as well, post-surgery, just to check on it all. And then they'll typically be discharged home and under the care of their GP and a specialist, possibly coming back to the like our clinic, outpatient clinic in the hospital sometimes. Ultimately, then they'll be checking on all the operative interventions to make sure that everything went well, and they'll start doing, once they sort of get past the initial acute phase, they'll typically have some kind of therapy like physiotherapy. Sometimes it's hydrotherapy, sometimes it's you know, exercise physiology and amongst all of that as well. And then typically, once they've lodged a claim, you'll see an insurer appointed rehabilitation provider, or you know, one that an injured person would prefer themselves. You'll see them come in and sort of speak to all the rehabilitation providers and work with the employer to facilitate a return to work, because people don't necessarily go back to work immediately full time. So sometimes you're gonna have a situation where people might only be able to do light duties to start with, but it'll be a gradual process over months or potentially even years. But it's better than somebody just sitting at home for that entire time. So that rehab provider, this is why we were talking earlier about how important it is to share the information. That all of that is going on, and they'll work with us. They'll work with Tim. They'll work with the GPs and the insurance companies, and everybody's sort of, they're like the linchpin between everything to do with the claim.
Fantastic. And Tim?
And so when they say that person comes to physio, they'll always go through a physiotherapy session. So they'll, even though they've broken the leg, but they'll still get a subjective physical biomechanical assessment regardless of their injury. And it's pretty important that the communication between, say, specialists or surgeons is done, especially when it's fractures or surgery as a result of the accident, as there's usually protocols and timeframes that can be adhered to for best outcomes. So when they're having treatment, manual therapy and exercise rehab will be focus of the treatment. working towards improvement of, say, the injury, as well as return to work pathways is always important. And then a physio will act as the point of advice for many aspects of their recovery. We aim to try and get the person back to their pre-injury or pre-cycling capacity and normal function, but it's also full duties at work. So if it's not just about them being able to get back on their bike, it's also being, if they've had a fracture and they can't get back to work, probably it's also about the physio's job is to help them work on that as well. So depending on the type and extent, the injury rehab is about 6 to 12 weeks, but some may be longer if the surgery's involved. So when we have the exercise rehab part, that's in the clinic one-on-one, and then it's always provided as an online program. So our clients will instruct them with all their exercises in the clinic, and then they'll actually go home and have an online program so they can do their exercise at home, how many times per week that's prescribed. And that's really important for them to carry on their rehab at home. A lot of people just do the exercise in the physio clinic and then not do it at home because they haven't got anything to sort of be guided by. We give a pretty complex online video program that helps with that. And that's an essential part of the process. And it can, adhering to a program at home can massively affect the level of improvement outcomes. We've shown that people who have homework to do that they've been instructed in the clinic, and they go home and they've got video format that they can watch, do so much better than people with just a few exercises scribbled out on a piece of paper. So it's super important that the actual rehab part of things is not just in the clinic, it also needs to be online. So with someone who has fractured the leg in the office, of course, depending on the extent of where that fracture is, the cyclist can expect to be back on, we'll guess this, but roughly be back on their bike, and we call it a stationary bike or their bike on a trainer, between the 6 and the 12 week mark. So it does depend on the fracture. So if it's a very small fibular fracture, they'll be on their bike in 6 weeks. But if it's a big fracture in their femur, they probably won't be on their bike for 12 weeks. And then maybe back on the road after 12-week mark. Of course, they'll depend on the fracture, but those are rough guidelines. And it also depends on, that's a guideline for a fracture, but if there's associated weakness with that as well, that can delay things even further. So everyone is very individual, but it is a usually lengthy process of fractures, for sure.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tim and Leigh. So what obligation does the injured bicycle rider have to cooperate with the treatment provider and insurance company, Leigh?
Look, under workers' comp and motor vehicle sort of C2P legislation here in New South Wales, you've got a very loose, well, you've got an obligation to mitigate your losses. Now, it's when I say loosely, it doesn't mean that an insurance company can direct treatment. It doesn't mean that someone can force you to go and have surgery because because the insurance company thinks it's going to get better. So when I say loosely, you retain the right to decide what treatment is best for you based on your specialist recommendations. However, there's an obligation on you to do what is considered reasonable and necessary. Now, that, however, the main thing is that you're communicating your recovery and you're participating in things that are non-invasive. So like Tim was saying, if you're going to physiotherapy and you're getting exercises, all right, well, if you're repeatedly going to physio and you're not doing the exercises, that's going to be reported to the rehabilitation provider. The rehabilitation provider is going to report that to the insurer because it's their obligation to do so. And then you're not going to get any more physio because you're not actually doing what is being recommended. So there's an obligation to mitigate your losses, but there's also an obligation on the insurer to only approve the treatment that's reasonable and necessary. So if you're not doing the treatment properly, they're not going to approve anymore. So, it sort of works along those lines. But the communication is a big part of it. And so the communication can be the difference of getting and the participation. But you know, if you're not communicating to the insurer what's actually going on, you're not going to get further treatment.
Exactly. So like the more the cyclist or the patient follows the advice in regards to you must do this, you know, this many times per week, you must have these exercises, the better it's going to be for you. The more you can sort of follow that and adhere to that, the better the outcomes they're going to get. And the physio's job, remember, is to improve function and assist with, you know, reduction of long-term pain and improve your return to work. So the harder you work with, or the cyclist works with a physio, the faster you're going to be able to achieve your outcomes and the results you need. So it does, there's an obligation from the patient to do the work and the physio to help the patient.
Fantastic. Thank you both again. But just to, I guess, put that into a practical sense as well, like we did before, can you give us examples of what happens when someone fully engages in rehabilitation versus someone who doesn't quite fully engage? Leigh?
Look, again, from the legal point of view, it's more around compliance. So non-compliance with your sort of treatment plans can lead to the treatment being denied. If it's really, you know, you're not doing anything at all and there's no legitimate reason for it, it can lead to your wages being denied if you're in receipt of wage payments. So and it could be terminated, it could be suspended. It just depends on the circumstances. So it also, I think, when you look at the claim from a purely legalistic point of view, it sends the wrong message to the insurer, because ultimately it's saying that this person isn't genuine in their approach to their own health rehabilitation. So, you know, that may trigger the insurance company to actually look more closely at the claim. You know, is this a legitimate claim? So, you know, we would big advocates for rehabilitation. We want all of our clients, particularly cyclists, because cyclists are fantastic with wanting to get back on their bike and being proactive in their treatment really, really enhances that, and you get back on the bike faster. So from a health perspective, you know, we typically see the failure to participate in rehabilitation also associated with a decline of mental health. So if you're not engaging, things tend to spiral out of your control. You know, your life's already been turned upside down in some respect. You've been involved in a car accident. So getting on with the treatment, making steps towards recovery, gives your mind, you know, there's an end goal here. If you plateau because you're not doing anything, you know, it's sending the wrong sort of message to your own mind, going, well, I may never get better. I'm going to be like this forever. So, you know, like participating in rehabilitation's got a really positive outcome, but for your physical health and your mental health.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. We find that people who don't prioritize their recovery tend to have poorer outcomes. You know, like they're significantly less likely to return to sport. They're not going to achieve their lifestyle goals or competitions. Say they're attending or they're wanting to do a cycling or triathlon. If they don't engage their rehab, they're not going to meet those goals. So people that, you know, we find that really fully commit to their rehab are the ones that simply do better. It's all about compliance and consistency. I bang on about consistency quite a bit with my programs. It's better to be, you know, rather than consistently doing something every day or 2 days and trying to cram it all into once a week. So the engagement is key, but also making sure that that patient does the right things throughout that week and instruct correctly. So if that person starts sort of falling off the wagon, part of the physio's job we find is part of our job is a little bit of counselling, is to try and motivate that client and make sure that, you know, they are, you know, committing to the exercise program, explaining to them why they need to be doing this to achieve their goals, and also setting their goals for them. So when they start sort of losing a bit of momentum, our job is to bring them back on track. And when they do really well.
Fantastic, thank you. We've only got a couple of questions left, so I might just point out we will hopefully have time for a couple of questions at the end. So if anyone has a question, write it down, and pop it into the chat at the bottom. So there's the three dots and the more button. If you click on that, you can open your chat bar, which will pop up on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can just type your question in there. On to the next question, though, now, and this one's just for you, Tim. What are some of the common rehabilitation issues that you see bicycle riders experience after an accident?
Okay, so many of the problems that we see with cyclists specifically is a lack of muscle strength in the hip. So more so with cyclists than we say with runners. And when they have less strength in the hip, it creates a reduced knee control sort of down the chain. Now you might think, oh, but cyclists have got big glutes and the big legs, they're strong. But it's the lack of weight bearing that cyclists do. So they're sitting on a seat. And so inside the hip, this is where I can kind of give you a crash course in anatomy, but the glute max is really good in cyclists, but they are missing other muscles in the hip that, say, a runner or someone who would stand a lot would use. So cyclists typically don't have very strong hip stabilizers, and that usually results in overuse and using their injuries down the track, especially if, say, their bike setup is not absolutely perfect. And so we make sure, we don't do bike fits, but we make sure that when a cyclist comes in, they're also assessed biomechanically to make sure, have they got the classic common issues that we see cyclists having, to make sure once they are doing their rehab for their injury, whatever they've got, they're also working on other things to make sure they don't get further problems down the track. So whether they've had a car crash or fall off their bike or getting cycling injury, we make sure that we try and tick all those boxes because we know that any cyclists have certain issues that they have problems with. And, if the tissues that say are injured, this is another common issue, if they remain weak after injury or after surgery, they just at risk of becoming more and more progressive and chronic. So the weaker the tissue gets, the more time frame it takes for that to rehab. So the longer they leave it, and the weaker they get, the further pain and chronic problems they get down the track. So it's important that we address everything in our assessment and make sure that our treatments cover not only their current injury, but any sort of underlying problems that they have. So when they go back cycling, they haven't just rehabbed their injury, they've also fixed up a few other things to make sure they don't get further problems down the track.
Thank you for that. Very important and specific advice, which if you don't get can create all sorts of other challenges. Are there any specific timeframes, Leigh, to observe if bicycle riders need to pursue a CTP claim in New South Wales?
Oh, look, there's a ton, to be honest, and they expire really quickly. So just at a high level, you've got 28 days to report the accident to the police. You've got 28 days to lodge the CTP application for personal injury benefits. That's not a die in the ditch kind of date, but if you miss it, then there's a whole heap of procedure that's got to be complied with in order to get a back payment of wages to the date. So we always just tell people, look, make sure you get your claim form lodged within 28 days. You avoid all of the problems if you do. Now, if you lodge it after that date, there is a process that you can go through, but probably not for here. We need to go through all of that. But if you're in hospital, for example, and you weren't conscious or something like that, or you simply were just unaware of it, you can lodge it after that 28 days, but it's got to be an explanation as to why. Not everyone is entitled to bring a damages claim, which is sort of what is loosely known as the lump sum payout claim. But for people who are, they have a 3-year limitation on doing that. So they're probably the key ones just to keep in mind. So that basically means most cases will go to the Personal Injury Tribunal in New South Wales before they go to court. But in order to protect your right to go to court, you have to lodge the proceedings within the tribunal within 3 years. That protects your timeframes to go to court. Now, most people won't go to court, so it doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, but it's always a good measure to make sure that you're doing that just to protect it in the off chance you do need to go to court. So specifically with regards to treatment, you've got the certificate of capacity that needs to be completed every 28 days. Now, that is given to the insurer from your doctor, and it outlines what the wage, your certificate, your capacity for work, so that you can get paid your wages. But at the same time, it also means that it's itemizing what the injuries are and what the treatment's going to be for the next month, along with any referrals. Like I said previously, that will then go to the insurer with the referrals. They've got 10 days to approve the treatment, and then they've got 20 days to pay it. Now, if the treatment provider like Tim, for example, is working with the insurer, that'll all happen behind the scenes. But if you haven't, you've got a treatment provider who wants to work with the insurance company, they might be billing you directly, and you actually have to hand over the receipt. So, and if you take things like medication and things like that, that doesn't need to be pre-approved in the same context, but at the same time, they're still going to take the full 20 days to pay you. So just you need to get into a cycle of, all right, making sure that you're sending off batches of things for reimbursement at the same time, because it gets quite complicated and hard to sort of maintain over the course of months and years. But that's basically it from a legal point of view.
Yeah, thanks, Leigh. Tim?
I think from a physio point of view, apart from the timeframes Leigh's just outlined, we always recommend to our patients that they have the approval for the treatment from the insurer ready to go before you attend your first appointment. This makes sure that you're not out of pocket for the first consultation, as the insurer pays us directly. So we have had some people that have had their bicycle injury and they've come in and just come in for treatment, and we've had to charge them private rates because they haven't got their claim organised, they haven't got the approval organised, they didn't come with a claim number, and then they'll be out of pocket and they won't get back the full amount from that. So we charge at a certain rate when they are under insurance, which is less than the private rate. So it's very important that cyclist does. That's the one thing we make sure is they do get that approval for treatment. Once we've got that approval and the claim number, then we'll take care of all the subsequent paperwork to be in future sessions of physio. So we have every treatment request form has a certain amount of treatments, and once we have done those sessions, then we'll request further, and we'll make sure that we've requested and approved for more sessions. So they just have to take care of the first, we take care of the subsequent. And then we work with the rehab provider, the GP, to make sure that you're basically back on your bike. Yeah.
Excellent. That's a really, really important point, particularly about that, making sure you've got that claim approval prior to your first treatment. That's really, really useful. Well, that's all the major questions. I've got one more question, and anyone that does have some questions, I've got another one coming earlier as well, which I'll ask. But before I get to those, I thought I'd better take the opportunity to ask, of course, if there's any special promotional specials or deals to members of Bicycle New South Wales. Leigh?
Oh, look, we love working with the members of Bicycle New South Wales. So we do a free initial consultation, and we'll represent you on a no-win, no-fee basis. So you're not out of pocket for anything throughout the life of your claim. We will give a discount to Bicycle New South Wales members at the presentation of our bill as well. So, but also with us, you're going to get this really unrivaled approach to rehabilitation. It's something that we're very proud of and enjoy, like I mentioned earlier, and really enjoy working with cyclists because they're a very motivated bunch of people. So yeah, by all means, we're more than happy to discount our fees in order to work with cyclists. We enjoy doing that. So that would be from us.
Thanks, Leigh.
Yeah, that's likewise. I mean, being a cyclist myself, I know that, cyclists are very, very keen to get back on their bike. And usually, definitely with the private clients, but also with, 60B workers' compensation, we find that cyclists are quite a motivated bunch of people. So they do their exercises, they're committed, they turn up to their physio appointments because they have a goal. They want to get back on their bike because they love it so much. So like Leigh said, we love treating them. And so for all Bicycle New South Wales members, we give 40% off our initial consultation. So this is when they're not part of CTP. So this was just a private consultation. If they were just coming to see us for, say, a neck problem that is completely unrelated to a crash or anything like that, it's just that because they are Bicycle New South Wales members, they get their initial consult of 40% off with any of the physios here. They just need to quote a code. I'll put that in the chat. Plus we also have a YouTube channel. So there's a lot of cycling related rehab treatments on there that cyclists can go and look at, which is free advice, of course, and free exercises that they can look at. So they can check us out on our YouTube channel. But yeah, happy to help.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that, Tim. And yeah, we'll get that out to members as well. 40% off for the initial consultation. That's very, very generous, and we'll continue promoting the Advantage Legal offer as well. I will keep on the chat bar in case anyone's got any questions. I do have two that have come through though. The first one was a pretty simple timeline question on your previous answer there, Leigh. In terms of that 28 days, that's all from the date of the incident or the crash, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yep. So, and it's a hard deadline too. So
yeah,
we always encourage people to go sooner. Never leave it to the last day. Things happen. We've had circumstances where people have gone. So for the police, for example, we've had people go to the police station. The police station's been closed because they've had an incident. We've had people go to the police station, have been unable to report it because they've gone to a police station which has been out of the area to where the accident happened. Usually that shouldn't matter, but it's just interesting. So sometimes things happen. You can't really put your finger on what could happen, and so if things don't go your way, you need time to be able to go back and actually speak to a lawyer or figure out what your next step is, and you need time to do that. So but yes, it's a hard 28 day for the police. With the claim form, again, hard 28 days from the date of the accident, as long as you're to lodge that claim form. Again, there is that ability to provide an explanation. It's called a full and satisfactory explanation if you go past that date. But again, it just adds to the whole stress of the circumstance you're going through. The insurance company retains the right to say that the explanation wasn't full and satisfactory, that you could have done it in time. But it just adds unnecessary stress to a situation, and if you're living paycheck to paycheck and the insurance company is saying they're not going to back pay you to the date of the accident and it's 4 or 5 weeks, they put a lot of stress on you in terms of financial stress. So again, just be aware, 28 days, 28 days.
Yep, absolutely. But hypothetically, if it took you 2 weeks to with lots of different issues and occurrences, which definitely can occur, takes you 2 weeks to put the police report in, then all of a sudden you've only got 2 weeks to get the claim in. So yeah, go early whenever possible, I guess, is the answer.
I mean, a lot of the time they will attend the accident scene as well. So that reporting will technically occur at the accident scene. But if it's a less minor injury a less serious accident where the injuries are minor, you're probably not going to get the police come to the accident, but you will still need to, if you're going to claim, even if it's only for minor treatment things, you're still going to have to lodge that claim with the police at some point. So the insurance company is not going to care one way or the other whether it's minor or major injuries to lodge the claim it has to be reported to the police.
Great, thank you. And the other question we had come in around CTP was, are there caps on levels of cover? So hypothetically, could you only be prescribed so many treatment numbers, or is that all, does that all come down to the monthly plans that are put in place?
It is subjective, but there are best practice guidelines. So the insurance companies will look at the type of injury. So you'll remember that I said at the beginning of the beginning of the seminar today that you've got. It's very important that the injuries are listed on the certificate of capacity, and that frames the treatment that the insurance company is going to approve for you. So if you've got a series of broken arms and legs, broken bones, well, then you're going to have a greater need for treatment because of the severity of the injury. But if you've suffered a whiplash injury, it's not like it's a hard, you're only going to get X number of treatments, but it will be capped sooner based on your individual circumstances. And they look at, practice studies and best practice medicine to sort of guide them on all of that. We also have the motor accident guidelines that give practitioners indications on how treatment is to be looked at from a reasonable and necessary perspective, which is the test that the insurers have to provide. So, that's the test that the practitioners have to adhere to in order for the insurer to approve the treatment. So again, that's quite subjective. It comes down to how much information the doctor or the physio or the rehabilitation provider is providing to the insurer so that they can understand what's going on. Now, in the event that information isn't provided, you will find that they will get cut off sooner. So the more information, and this is where I was saying before again around the need for open and transparent communication with the rehabilitation provider, because the more information that's being fed to the relevant people, any errors can be picked up, and you're less likely to have disputes about the need for treatment. So because everybody's on the same page. So it's not defined caps per se, as in like, you're going to have 12 sessions of physio and that's it. But there are subjective limits based on the type of injury that you've got, and that'll be all based in and around what your providers recommend. But there will be a point where the insurer says, you're not getting anywhere with this. That's it. All right. And again, it'll come back to whether you've been doing your exercises, whether you've been doing, attending the appointments. So they look at all of this when approving or declining treatment.
Yeah,
Excellent.
From a physio point of view, when we do our plans for every, say we've done our 8 treatments or whatever it is, we're going to put on a new plan. We have to prove and provide that this person is progressing. That treatment has worked. We have our objective measures at the start. We do our treatment plan and we show that they've improved, and therefore, and what the plan is for the next session. Why are we doing more treatments? Because we want to get this person from here to here. And how are we doing that? So, like Leigh said, it's very important that the physio plans go through with right information for the insurer about how that person is going to progress, what exercises they're going to do, what functional parameters they are going to achieve, or what their goal is, so that the treatment is justified.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Just checking, we don't have any further questions, and we're probably pretty close on time anyway, which is fantastic. So I wanted to thank everyone for their attendance and their interest, and we look forward to bringing more informative webinars to friends and members of Bicycle New South Wales in the near future. As always, if anyone's got any ideas on future topics, then we would love to hear about them. info@bicycleNSW.org.au, and tell us your ideas. And of course, thank you so much to our 2 presenters tonight, Leigh Davidson and Tim from Physio Fitness. The huge wealth of information and awareness, which really helps us and our friends or family members if they're faced with such challenges through bicycle riding. So thank you, everyone, and please, as always, ride safe.